Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week, we read John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, the story of a man whose blindness is healed by Jesus. We watch the incremental changes in the way the man seems to understand what has happened. We wonder about the different beliefs that may lie behind the statement that God's work could be revealed through this person in particular, precisely because he is blind. And we think a lot about the things that garner our attention, that make us think we know, that actually blind us to whole layers of reality. Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby.
Hey, Amy, how are you this week?
I am doing all right. It is kind of a dreary day in Atlanta, but I am I feel like, I don't know if you ever feel this way, Bobby. You can share your feelings with our listeners. If you ever feel like you're kind of actively looking for little pops of happiness, or there's a beautiful thing that there's a child in a red coat that pops out in the dreary weather, or I don't know. I'm throwing my gaze around, what can delight me today?
Yeah. So what have you discovered?
It's been a little hard. So we're in this. So, okay, the Jewish calendar doesn't quite line up with the Gregorian calendar.
Right, sure.
Because we're lunar and whatever. So in order to make the calendars sort of line up, instead of a leap day like we get in the Gregorian calendar, February 29th, we get a leap month sometimes.
Yeah.
So this year we get leap month. And so, but the month we get two of is the month of Adar, which we're in the month of Adar now. That's why I'm telling the story. And Adar leads into this crazy festive holiday called Purim.
Yeah.
And so the reason I'm telling you all this is that we are supposed to do things actively to increase our joy.
Hey, I like that.
Or increase, I don't know, other people's joy. We're supposed to increase joy.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to tell our religious school kids this weekend that we're supposed to increase joy. And I'm really hoping that that's going to mean flash mobs.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try to let them decide how they want to increase our joy.
So in a year like this one, do you celebrate Purim twice?
No. You only celebrate it once at the end, but you have 2 months.
You prepare for it for 2 months, anticipation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love that, Amy. The winter months to me, between sort of the holiday season and when the flowers bloom, I really I struggle this time of year. And in the Christian calendar, there's nothing. We enter in a couple of weeks, we're going to enter into the season of Lent, which is really depressing. And we're supposed to reflect on, sinfulness and brokenness and all these things, which is a great thing to do, but it's a hard thing to do in the middle of winter. I wish that we had a holiday where we could all dress up in fancy clothes and aren't you supposed to drink until you can't tell?
Yeah.
Haman from Mordecai.
You are supposed to eat meat and get drunk.
Yes.
You're supposed to do. Not every day during Adar, but yes, at Purim itself. Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is an ideal holiday for the depth of the winter drearies. Yeah.
It's a fascinating holiday. It's like Carnival, sort of.
Yeah.
Where I don't know. Yeah, it turns everything on its head. Let's do all the things we're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just mixing it up, biding our time till the flowers bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the little pops of joy that I had this week was reading this guy who was born blind, and then that we're going to read about this week. I just love him. He's just real. He shoots from the hip.
Yeah.
I'm quite enamored.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your take on him. I think he's an interesting character too, but I don't know that I've had quite the same like level of love for him that I can see on your face. So maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I'll still love him at the end. I wish he had a name. I want to call him something, but other than like the blind guy.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing in scripture, right? The unnamed characters tend to get named by the sort of distinctive characteristic.
Yeah, right. I am determined not to call him that. I don't think that's the most important part of his story.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. We'll think of a name by the end when it's too late. Yeah.
Great. So we are in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, which is all one story. It's a lot of verses, but it's all one story. So it hangs together. It's meant to hang together. Should we just pop in? Do you want to give us any kind of introduction?
I think we should just pop in.
Okay, let's do it. So I am reading from the NRSV. As he walked along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. I'm like picturing how to tell this story to children without encouraging them to like make spit mud and spread it on people.
Yeah. I mean, there's worse things you could do. Like spit mud.
Yes, but spit mud spread on someone else's face without their
consent. This is a problem.
Consent.
Yes.
This is a problem.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough. Don't do that.
Don't do this particular thing. Yeah.
It is interesting the degree to which the man who you like so much, in the rest of the text, like, has no part in this at all. He's almost like a stage prop that Jesus decides to heal. In very public way, in an interesting kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, I found that a little like disturbing in the moment that it unfolds. Obviously, it turns out okay. You know, we do hear from this man, and it's a good thing. But if you picture it unfolding in the moment and saying nothing to this man, he may or may not even know what you're doing. Like, I don't know what his awareness was. And then have someone spread spit mud on his disabled body part. Like, I don't know. I would imagine that was kind of a frightening thing in the moment for him.
It reminds me a little bit of the story that we read a couple of weeks ago about the guy who was unable to walk and who was sitting next to the pool. And there Jesus also approached him without being invited. Although there was more of a sort of conversation before the healing actually happened that gave some consent, sort of.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that, we've talked about sometimes Jesus seems pretty reluctant to approach people and do miracles. In these two stories, he's been very, very forward about going and finding someone and healing them sort of unasked. So it's just interesting to watch in the Gospel of John when people ask him to do something, he's like, he eventually will do it, right? But he's a little hesitant. And then when no one asks him, he's like, he's totally on it. And paying attention to the differences in those two, I think, is important.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I think it sort of underscores what we've been talking about for weeks now, which is that the healings maybe serve a different purpose for Jesus than they do for that, for the person who's getting the healing in that moment, or the person who feels that urgent want, that urgent need.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some kind of context that would help us make sense out of this question from his disciples in verse 2? Who sinned that he was born blind?
Yeah, I mean, so in the ancient world and in certain strains of thought in ancient Judaism as well, this was sort of an understanding that sin could be visited on children. We see this in Exodus 34. God says in visiting the iniquities of the parents on the children to the third and fourth generation. So there's this idea in Judaism at the time, not unique to Judaism at the time, that sins of earlier generations could be sort of retribution could be taken on succeeding generations.
Yeah.
In one kind of way, I mean, this is a really useful way of saying, like, why does it seem like, good things happen to bad people? Like wicked people get rewarded all the time in life. And this is a way theologically of saying, well, it's gonna come back to them. It just might be after they die. Like that's kind of
that's interesting. It's not so much about like what is fair to this individual human life. It's much more of a shared intergenerational fate.
That's it. This idea, the question, did the child sin, right? And so he's born blind. And so then there's an implication that if he did something wrong, there must have been like a prenatal sin. Yeah. This is actually talked about in some of the ancient texts about considering the possibility whether, it goes back to that Genesis, wherever that is, Genesis 24, where Jacob and Esau wrestle in the womb. Yeah. And so there's this idea that there actually is like a life that you have in the womb, and it would technically be possible to sin in the womb and therefore be born blind because of some, womb misdeed of yours, I guess. And so this is the argument, like, and the assumption seems to be it's going to be one or the other of these, like either his parents or something he did.
I can tell you that one of my children, I'm not joking, required me to eat sausage McMuffins during my pregnancy. I mean, I remember buying the sausage McMuffins and sitting. I did not eat any like this. Don't eat pork. Don't really eat McDonald's. Don't eat like any of this stuff. And I remember buying them and then sitting in the car with these sausage McMuffins and thinking like, I can't eat this. This is disgusting.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do it. And I started crying at the thought of not eating them.
Oh, no.
And then I ate them so fast I bit my finger. Bobby, it was so bad.
That is such a sad, tragic story.
Sinful
and I'm laughing,
little
and
fetus. I know. Luckily,
yeah.
she was born healthy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, it almost reminds me a little bit of like it's some sort of inverse of prosperity gospel.
Yeah. They're very much of a part. Yeah. If you are a good person, you will be rewarded, which means if you have been rewarded, you must be a good person. And then the flip side of that is this. You shouldn't be suffering unless somebody did something wrong. Yeah. The Hebrew scriptures are divided about this. And so you get both Jeremiah and Ezekiel trying to break that correlation and saying,
yes,
look, people, it's not, I guess, what's that saying? The parents eat grapes and the children's teeth are set on end or whatever. I forget. I shouldn't have started down that road.
It's a catchy phrase. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ezekiel and Jeremiah both say, no, a person's responsible for their own misdoings.
Yeah.
So the tradition is divided, but here the tradition seems to be being invoked in a way that says it must be either one or the other, which gives Jesus an opportunity. It must be one or the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I interrupted you, which gives Jesus an opportunity to
offer a third way.
That.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yep,
which is not really unique. What I'm trying to say is like what Jesus suggests here is not unique to Jesus, but in the text it appears as though it is.
Oh, I like that. I like that point in particular. There's something in the text later that made me think along those lines too. Mm-hmm. So then what do you think it means? What do you think Jesus means when he says he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him?
Yeah.
Do you understand that to mean like this is an opportunity for miraculous healing, or that somehow God's works are revealed in particular through difference or through disability in our bodies because our attention is there in a different place? Or how do you understand what Jesus is getting at?
I love the way you asked that question because it opens up some different kinds of possibilities. The way this is often read is Jesus is saying something fairly wooden, which is he was born blind so I could give him sight and everyone could be impressed.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a utilitarian sort of notion. And I mean, I think that probably is in part what the text has in mind. But when you read on in the story, this person actually comes not just to a physical sight, but in the understanding of John to like this deep spiritual insight as well. He truly understands what God is up to by the end of this text. And I do think where your question led me anyway, to say this text is saying something about the capacity, like difference in the capacity for some people to see differently, maybe because they are sort of excluded from what society considers the normative ways of experiencing the world. They have some openness to insight from other aspects of experience. I think that's where you were headed anyway. And I really like
Yeah.
that if that's what you were thinking.
Yeah, I think in so many ways, reading this passage made me think about the ways that if this sort of typical human experience, oh gosh, even words fail me here, but what we sort of picture as a typical human experience, if you feel somewhat outside of that for various reasons, that might be disability or might be some other thing related to your background or identity, it makes you pay attention differently to things, Because you're
And it
sort
is.
of,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, because you're sort of born outside the box in some ways. And so,
Yeah, I think that's right. And you've sort of gestured to this idea previously this spring, and I really appreciate it. And if you think about who has sort of understood who Jesus is thus far in the gospel, it's a woman from Samaria. It's a man who is unable to walk. It's this guy who is unable to see. His disciples are from Galilee. Like, can anything good come out of Galilee? And the people who are not able to see are people who are sort of part of the main structures, structures of privilege in Jerusalem, in the religious center. And so we have this sort of, lack of understanding that's being shaken out along the lines that you're describing.
Yeah. And I like how it plays out in this story.
One of the things that's interesting to me there is that you can trip up on what Jesus says, we must do the works of him who sent me.
Mm-hmm.
And some manuscripts read, I must do the work of him who sent me. And some manuscripts read, we must do the work of him who sent us. But the manuscript evidence suggests that this translation is actually right. We must do the works of him who sent me, which is to suggest, I think, that God has sent Jesus to do certain kinds of work in the world, but it's not just Jesus's work. It is also the work of those who believe in Jesus. Right, so that Jesus is sort of spreading the responsibility out amongst his disciples. Is that how you would read that?
I like that a lot. I hadn't noticed that detail in the text, but I really like that, and I'm thinking about it sort of as it fits with the second part of that sentence. Night is coming when no one can work. So this particular call, I guess, is for the life while Jesus is alive on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the use of night and day and dark and light in John is persistent and kind of an interesting usage. But yeah, that's the way I read that, is while it's daytime means while Jesus is present, and then nighttime means after Jesus has departed.
Yeah.
And he goes on to say, while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And so that sort of clarifies that a little bit.
So we started out talking about this, that Jesus makes this like spit mud cast, like some kind of bizarro facial thing.
Yeah.
Can you, do you have any thoughts on the particular mechanism through which this healing is carried out? Because presumably Jesus could just say, we told the other guy, get up and walk.
Yeah.
So what do you see in the mechanism for this healing?
Yeah, I mean, one thing to say about that is the spit of certain people was understood in the ancient world to have healing properties. So we read about the Emperor Vespasian healing people with his spit and things like that. So this idea that saliva contributes to healing is not specific to this text, but kind of a shared understanding in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
The mixing with mud, I'm a little less clear. There's going to be an issue about Sabbath later. Spoiler alert. And so maybe the mixing with mud, right? Maybe the mixing with mud is part of that issue of, he's kneaded these two things together, and kneading things is something you're not supposed to do.
Supposed to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the last detail in this little section that was interesting to me is Jesus tells him to wash in the pool of Siloam. So it's not exactly that the spit and mud do the healing. It's the spit and mud and then the washing in the pool of Siloam. What can you we talked about the pool of Siloam a little bit last time, I think it was. Remind us about that.
So we talked about the pool of Siloam it's like right adjacent to the temple. And I think the context in which we talked about it was that at Sukkot, at the harvest festival, where they're sort of celebrating abundance and rain and praying for more rain and crops, they would take a pitcher of water from Siloam and sort of pour it out and it was a very joyful act. And I think it was sort of like a reservoir, like it filled with rainwater, living waters, when there was rain. So it was sort of a symbol of abundance in the desert in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you thinking anything else about Siloam?
To me, it's just interesting that, like we were saying, Jesus probably could have done this healing without the mud and the spit, and presumably Jesus could have done this healing without sending him to Siloam. And so it's kind of an interesting effort, I think, on the part of John anyway, to connect Jesus with things that came before him again. And so this is not something that's totally new and different, but it's Jesus connects back to the thing that's important in the tradition that he comes out of, but he's doing something different with it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I like that. All right. Should we pick up?
Let's pick up.
Let's see what the people say about this little miracle. I'm picking up in verse 8. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." I think it's so interesting here how many times how many times we're told what happens. The narrator tells us what happened.
Yeah.
And then they ask the man, and the man tells the crowd what happened. And then the Pharisees ask him, and the man again tells the Pharisees what happened. Why do you think we get that so many times?
It is so fascinating. And they're like, "Is this the guy?" "I don't think that's the guy." "That might be the guy." And he's like, "Hey."
I don't know, it kind of looks like the guy, but maybe it's not the guy. It could be any guy.
I mean, I read that in a couple of ways. One is about the difficulty of people accepting something that sort of appears to be outside of what they can imagine to be true. And so they just keep, there's no way that this is what has happened. So they keep pushing. And the other is something about the degree to which people don't trust the testimony of people that they consider to be outside of the mainstream, or however you want to think about it. Like, this guy he was blind, he was a beggar. And so they just don't trust him when he says that he's the guy. They think he must be pulling some kind of a scam, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is familiar to me, actually, from the work that I do at Mercy Church. Like, people are always, they're not always terribly trustworthy, just like the rest of us are not always terribly trustworthy.
Yeah.
But there seems to be, one imagines that this guy were somebody of higher status, that people would be like, "Oh my goodness, like, that is you." But with this guy, they're like, even though they're saying, it's me, we don't actually believe you. What do you do with that repetition?
Actually, the repetition didn't really stand out to me until I was reading it aloud.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this recounts the details many times.
Yeah.
But what you were just saying was making me think of, I was struck at the end that the Pharisees, who have been reluctant to take seriously anything that any non-scholarly person has had to say about anything, they ask him, "What do you say about him?" And I just, thinking back to what you were just saying about, we sort of ask people, but if they don't say what we want them to say, then you keep fishing around for a different answer. Like, we sort of want to know what you think, but we also want to reserve the right to dismiss what you think. I don't know. I thought it was striking that these pretty close-minded Pharisees so far have been willing to entertain what he thinks of his own experience. Like, does his experience give him insight into who Jesus is? I guess. But a different kind of insight.
Yeah, no, he's definitely got insight, but it's interesting their process. And you're exactly right. And we seem to have a division in the Pharisees now. And it's a little bit of division that we were wishing that they would have had last time when Nicodemus was like, hey, y'all, we say the prophet doesn't, or the Messiah doesn't come from Galilee, but we also have this thing where we should hear people out. Here they're actually more than just Nicodemus seems to be doing that. And so now we've got these two possibilities. One is he's a sinner who breaks Sabbath law because he did whatever he did on the Sabbath day. The other is he must be sent from God because a sinner can't do a miraculous thing. And so they're taking the testimony of this guy and they're trying to process it through their understanding of the tradition. And they've got two kind of different paths they can go down.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is a step beyond where we have seen. Like now we get the sense that there's more of this group of sort of elite religious scholars who are open to the possibilities.
Yeah, who are willing to, last time we talked about people who are sort of so attached to a particular set of rules that they believe are ironclad, that they're unwilling to see miracles that don't seem to follow those rules. And that I feel like that's what we have again here is like this sort of somewhat ironclad, maybe slightly less than before, but pre-existing idea in their mind that someone who is, connected to God would not be doing this stuff on the Sabbath. But then, there's more and more weight on the other side of the equation. Like, well, then how do you explain this?
Yeah. And of course, we've seen previously this idea that God works on the Sabbath. And so Jesus, because Jesus is doing God's work, Jesus is technically in his own understanding, or at least in John's understanding, is not actually violating Sabbath law. He can do it because he's God and God works on the Sabbath. So there's sort of a third option that the Pharisees have not really considered, but they're opening up to this, to the idea, other ideas, other possibilities.
Yeah. Okay, this question is a little bit maybe from left field, where I tend to spend my time. But in earlier texts, when Jesus was speaking about himself, you pointed out a couple of times that he says, I am he, or I am, and it's this connection to Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, God's statement that I am who I am. I was wondering, it stood out to me in verse
9.
In verse 9, and then somewhat in verse, it's all in verse 9. It stood out to me in verse 9 that we get, it is he, and I am the man.
Mm-hmm.
Did that make your ears tingle too, or do you think that's just a function of weird translation from Greek?
No, it's actually the Greek is ego eimi. It's the same Greek. The CEB has it's me, which I think is kind of, which is technically true. It sounds very different than I am when you say it's me. Yeah, and I don't quite know what to do with that because we have definitely had a theological reading of I am when Jesus says it, and here it's on the lips of this guy who's clearly not to be equated with God.
No, right.
I wonder, one way of sort of thinking about it is, Jesus has been saying this all along and no one has been believing him. And here we have another sort of person saying I am and no one is believing him either, even though the claim is much simpler.
It's different. Yeah, sure.
But it is an interesting sort of usage. And ego eimi is, it's fairly, it's just normal Greek, right? Is what you would say. Yeah. And also it has this other resonance. And so which way we're supposed to read the resonances or whether you just say, well, that's just the way people talk.
Right.
Do you do anything with that?
I don't. I want to. Mm-hmm. I want to think about sort of God moving in this person, or this person, being a place where God reveals God's self, or
I like that. Yeah.
Or something like that. I don't know that it's really upheld by the text. It might be a little bit of a push, but like I'm thinking back to this idea that God's works are revealed.
Yeah.
I don't know, that God might inhabit differently a person, but certainly, yes, we have to be careful not to equate it with Jesus's statements. But he's not saying I am Jesus or I am the Son of Man. He's just saying I am the man.
That's so interesting because I was paying attention to my sort of internal editor, and when you started down that road, I'm like, nope. You know, like,
Yeah.
this guy cannot be saying I am in that sense. But then, like,
Yes.
where you ended up, I really think that's worth thinking about. And, you know, like, I'm trying to make my internal editor, my internal, like, heresy monitor calm down a little bit. Because, I mean,
yeah.
we just finished reading a text where, you know, Jesus said, when you eat my flesh, I abide in you and you abide in me. And so there really is this sense, or like when you, once you've had living water, like you become a source of living water. Like we really have been moving around this idea that once you have encountered Jesus in a certain kind of way, like you yourself become some kind of different witness. You have a different connection so that you're not entirely distinguishable, right? The life that you live is in some way different. It abides in Jesus, and Jesus is working out through you. And so I really think there's something there that's worth thinking about. When he says ego e me, he could not have said it with that resonance, 10 minutes ago. But now he says it in a way that says Jesus is working, or God is working out something in me. I think that's worth thinking about, even though my initial reaction
Even though there have to be a lot of we have to be careful not to go too far down that slope.
Yeah.
But like John likes to do, he just throws some confusing ideas out there and sees what we might do with them.
The other thing that this guy has done, which I think is interesting, is, when he talks about Jesus in verse 11, he says, the man they called Jesus made mud. And then in verse 17, when they say, who did this? They say, or what do you say about Jesus? He says, he's a prophet. So he's making these kind of moves across the text, and we'll see that they continue.
Yeah.
From Jesus as a man who is a healer to Jesus as a prophet. So it's interesting to kind of watch this guy. He's continuing to be transformed. He's continuing to gain insight in addition to his physical sight.
I'm going to hold on to that reading of him. I think that part of what I love about him is like he just says what he knows.
Yeah.
Like he just, you asked me what happened that I can see. I'm going to tell you what happened that I can see. And I'm just going to tell you simply, and I'm not going to interpret the events for you. I'm not going to draw conclusions about it because you didn't ask for my conclusions.
Yeah.
But when they do ask for his conclusions, then he'll tell them his conclusions.
Yeah.
Like he just seems very like, I don't know. I just like this guy. I want to go get a beer with him.
Yeah. Hey everyone, it's Bobby here from the Bible Worm Podcast, and do we have an exciting deal for you? This month, you can receive all the benefits of being a Bible Worm subscriber for the introductory price of just $4. Throughout the month of February, subscribers at any level will receive early access to episodes, as well as weekly liturgies and video lectures to accompany each podcast episode for the entire month. Plus, you'll get a terrific Bible Worm sticker that will make you the envy of your friends and family. There's no obligation, and you can cancel anytime. If you want to take advantage of this special offer, visit us at patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast and sign up at the Bible Worm supporter level for just $4 for the month. If you've always wondered what it's like to be a Bible Worm subscriber, we hope you'll join us in this special offer. And now, back to this week's episode.
Picking up in verse 18. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." I think this is a really funny, sort of sidebar story.
Yeah.
They
Can you say a little bit about why?
They didn't believe him, so they called his parents. It's when my kids don't want. I mean, they don't do it anymore. But when they were little and would threaten to call my parents and tell them what a terrible mother I was, I don't know. I think it's funny, but it did make me wonder, how old is this? A man, or is this a 14-year-old?
It kind of changes your reading, doesn't it? We don't really know, do we?
No.
He is of age means, I guess he's older than 12 maybe or something like that. He's at least a teenager. Or he could be 40.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it really changes. Like, if you read him as a 40-year-old and they're calling his parents and saying, like, is this guy really your son? Like, that's very different in my head than, like, he's just barely, he's 13 or whatever, and you're asking. But I don't know how we should read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of like the challenge of reading it as he's older because, there's a sense in which people who are beggars in particular have to beg to survive are sort of infantilized by society a little bit, and like nobody trusts them. And so, like, to me, I think it's interesting to read him that way, as he's a full grown man, and yet people don't trust him because of sort of his background.
Yeah. And when I first read his parents' response, like, yes, that's our son, and yes, he was born blind. After that, go talk to him. Like, stop trying to go around and ask us. I really liked that until the note that that they're just trying to, like, throw him under the bus.
Can you say a little more? Yeah. That's an interesting progression.
Yeah, I mean, that I think this note that his parents send the Pharisees or send the Jews back to their son because they're afraid that they'll get kicked out.
Yeah.
I guess they're afraid they'll be kicked out if they report what they know of how he was healed. I don't know. I feel like the next part is a big jump. Yeah. Like, the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Yeah. Like, no one's been talking about that. Like,
yeah. There's a lot of scholarly writing about this verse, because you're exactly right. There's nothing so far in the Gospel of John that suggests that anything like this has been happening. And it's anachronistic in the life of Jesus to think that this even could have been happening, really. And so a lot of scholars think this reflects a later time period, maybe the time period of the community that's reading John, or the author of the Gospel of John, who maybe have been kicked out of the synagogue, or at least feel alienated from the synagogue. And so they're reflecting back their own experience later back into this text and saying, well, this is what eventually happens. So we can see ourselves in this choice that these parents have to make. It's all a little sort of circumspect, but it seems to be the case that at least the initial audience of John might have recognized themselves in this decision that has to be made here.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it also, when I said no one's talking about that, I actually wasn't thinking no one's talking about kicking you out of the synagogue, although that's also has been true. I was thinking no one in this story has been talking about confessing Jesus as the Messiah. Like, even the man himself has been fairly measured in what he's reported. And it seems like the parents could have been similarly measured and said, this man, Jesus, put this, this is how it happened. So it just seems like it feels a little out of place to me.
Yeah, so you get the sense that if they say, yes, Jesus healed him, that's going to be understood apparently in the story as a confession that Jesus is the Messiah, even though the man himself has only ever said he's a prophet.
Yeah, it just seems like, just everything like ratcheted up.
Yeah.
A lot of levels.
It's interesting, too, about whether, like, you get the impression, as you were saying initially, that they don't actually know who healed him. Like, they weren't there.
They weren't there.
But then you get the impression then in this latter part of this that they do know and they're hiding it because they don't want to get in trouble. And it makes a lot of difference, even though it's not explicit in the text, whether you think the parents do or do not know.
Yeah.
Or whether they feel like they can't even just say, like, they could say, this is what our son is saying and we believe our son, right? But they don't say that. They say, you go ask him what he's saying.
Yeah.
And so they do distance themselves. I mean, to me, there's an interesting kind of opening interpretively here about the kind of divisions that religious belief can cause in families.
Yeah.
And, here there's a family that seems to be kind of suddenly being disrupted by this amazing thing, really, that has happened. Mm-hmm. But the responses to it are causing a rift that maybe does or does not need to be there, both between the son and his parents, and then also between whoever believes in this miracle and their religious community. There's all sorts of division that suddenly just shows up because of Jesus. It seems to be kind of a key moment in this text and a key theme in this gospel, and probably worth thinking about a little bit as interpreters.
Yeah. Yeah, I think somewhat relatedly, another thing that stood out to me in this, and we've, you certainly have underscored this for us before, but it's very strange. Like, this is apparently, it hasn't identified this man as being Jewish, but apparently they're Jewish if the parents are concerned about being kicked out of the synagogue.
I think so, yeah.
So for the text to say his parents, these Jews, said this because they were afraid of the Jews is a very strange turn of phrase.
Yeah.
And so I think from the perspective of the text, it's clearly setting up this like differential between believers and the Jews are the bad guys. But it's helpful to me to remember when it says the Jews here, it means the religious authorities.
Yeah.
Like the authorities of their religious community.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's not all the Jews because they're Jews.
That's right. Exactly right.
But the text doesn't want us to think about it that way. Like it's trying to set up the differentiation between Jews and followers of Jesus, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about how John uses the term hoi Judaioi, the Jews. And he uses it sometimes just to talk about people from Judea. He uses it sometimes to talk about people who, are Jewish religiously. He uses it sometimes to talk about Jewish authorities, which is what he seems to be doing here. And whether he is intentionally vague or just not very precise, like whether he's in trying to merge all these groups together or not, from our perspective, they certainly get muddled and it's hard to tell who's who. And I think you're exactly right that the concern here is about religious authorities, not about, your average Jewish person in Jerusalem. But that's not clear at all in the text.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on?
Yes.
Okay. Picking up in verse 24. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've already told you, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. I love this guy. I feel like he's like this guy that the unnamed man who has been given his sight. I feel like it's like going to a logic professor who's like, "Let me break this down for you. Yeah. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know.
Yeah.
Here are some conclusions we can draw."
Yeah.
I just love him.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your affection for him. I think he's an interesting character, but I don't think I have appreciated him in the way that you are appreciating him. And you're really opening up that character for me. Yeah.
I just picture him in front of a big blackboard saying
yeah, little chalky hands. Yeah.
Yeah, he does not seem to be making any big statements of belief. He's just laying out, here's the data.
Yeah.
And I love that he starts with, the authorities start out with "give glory to God." I guess they mean that in contradistinction to giving glory to the man, Jesus. Is that how you read that? Why would they start out with "give glory to God"?
So the way I would understand that is this sort of "give glory to God" is sort of like it's like an oath formula, is sort of how Gail O'Day describes it, as like, it's a way of saying, seriously, you got to tell the truth now. So give glory to God. This man is a sinner. Which is kind of interesting because, there's some irony there. Like John likes to have ironic statements, and so this give glory to God is like exactly what the man has been doing.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't read it that they don't understand it that way. So they're saying to tell the truth would be to say that this man is a sinner.
Right.
But in fact, he's already been giving glory to God by saying that Jesus is a prophet.
Yeah, and then I love that he doesn't start with like, no, he's not. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to fight you. He starts with, I don't know whether he's a sinner. I don't know this guy.
Yeah.
I just
Here's
met
what I
him
know.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Here's what I know. And I love also that he's that he says, "Why? I've already told you this.
Yeah.
Like, why are you asking me again? Like this?
Yeah.
My testimony has not changed." But then I was actually surprised to see this question. Do you also want to become his disciples?
Yeah.
Do you think the man sees himself as a disciple of Jesus at this point?
I mean, it certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
Although he has not given us any direct evidence of that. I mean, he's sort of been on his way there, saying this man who healed me, and then he's a prophet, and then but that's what it sounds like. And we've talked about in this gospel how people can become disciples based on other people's testimony. We saw that all the way back in John 1 with the first disciples who followed Jesus going and getting their friends and families and saying, come see this guy. We saw this with the Samaritan woman at the well. And so there is a sense in which testimony has power in this gospel. And if I keep telling you what happened to me, eventually you're going to believe it. I mean, he's poking at them too, right? Like, why do you keep asking it,
Yeah.
But I do think there is something here too about the power of testimony that if you hear the story often enough, you're going to end up being a believer too. So be careful what you ask for.
That's interesting. That's really interesting that this testimony could have power on you that you didn't mean for it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I still am sort of taken if he is beginning to see himself as a disciple, that he does not, he won't jump to the end of the story. Like he won't come to Jesus's defense against their initial accusation immediately.
Yeah.
He just says like, here's what I know and here's what I don't know. And it just, I don't know. I think that's what I love about him. Like, and we've talked before about that there are a lot of sort of easy entry ramps to following Jesus and John.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what I see here. And if that's being equated with what it means for this person to be a disciple, like he's willing to call himself a disciple and he still won't say, I don't know whether he's a sinner.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of cool. I don't know. I feel like it's another on-ramp for me among all the on-ramps that we
It's interesting because John, in the popular imagination, is often understood as, it's not exactly a high bar for discipleship, but it's a sense that you need to be able to confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, right? That all who believe in him should have eternal life. And that people tend to think that belief means being able to say out loud, Jesus is the Son of God, or at least Jesus is not a sinner.
Yeah.
But what you're pointing to, which I think is right, is that belief in this gospel does not mean that. Belief means just trusting what you know, right? Like trusting Jesus. And this guy does trust Jesus. He healed me. I know he did. Like, that's what I know. And that's enough. I think that's exactly right.
It's enough for here. Like he does get further.
He does.
In the next chunk of text we read, but
he's already a disciple, or at least he seems to be associating himself with that, like you're saying. Yeah. So the trust is the thing. It doesn't necessarily matter exactly what you think or exactly what you say. Mm-hmm. It just matters that the trust is what matters.
Right. Right. Or what you're still working out in your head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think of the religious leader's response to this whole testimony that he gives? He says, we don't know where he came from. He made a blind man see. We assume this is through God. Mm-hmm. We know God doesn't respond to sinners. Therefore, this man must be from God. Like he takes us through the whole logic proof, and they don't really respond to his points, but they cut down his credibility.
Yeah. No, to me, that's so true to the way people are. Like all of us, I think, or at least many of us, that we know what we know, or we know what we think we know. And instead of being able to take on new evidence, we move to the ad hominem attacks and dismiss the person as a person. that's very familiar to me. And, I'm sure that I'm guilty of doing that along the way.
Yeah, I'm
The
sure
other
we
thing
all
that
are.
we've talked about previously is this idea that God is working in ways that the religious leaders have not been entirely prepared for. Like, you sort of feel like they're close to getting what's happening, but they can't make the move because they have a text that says, working on the Sabbath is a sin, or the Messiah can't be from Galilee, and they get stuck there. And God is doing something related, but off to the side, and they're sort of narrow understanding prevents them from seeing that God moves outside of their narrow understanding. To me, this is really useful, not for thinking about like what was wrong with the Pharisees, but for diagnosing our sort of own relationship to God in our traditions, and to say, yeah, God is in our traditions, and also God is free to work in new ways that our traditions weren't fully prepared for. And so we need to pay attention to the points at which we sort of shut down or stop listening to people or not accepting testimony or explaining things away because we say, well, that can't be the way God is. Like God can kind of be how God is, right? Like, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. And so to me, this is interesting as a religious leader myself to say, like, okay, well, where are the points at which I dismiss what seems to be fairly obvious, testimony from others, because I just can't allow that God could do that thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I think those are exactly the questions that should be raising for us as modern readers. Okay, should I read this last little bit?
Well, what do you make of the you're his disciple, but we're Moses' disciple? Like yeah.
That's not a phrase that I'm familiar with. Disciples of Moses. I mean, Moses didn't really, certainly there are, it depends what we mean by disciple. If we mean like students of and in the lineage of, certainly that organizational principle was operative in the Jewish community. But the idea of being a disciple of Moses, I'm not familiar with that language.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Like, that's not a common way of understanding what it means to be Jewish now or in the first century. And so it's kind of interesting that the gospel is working out categories of you got to be somebody's disciple, or maybe the Pharisees.
We need a parallel category. Yeah.
The other thing I think that's going on there is, Moses received the word of God at Sinai, and so there's a trust of him. According to this text. The irony that John is trying to play with, I think, is that Jesus is the word that Moses received on Sinai. And so there's no need for a distrust of him if you only kind of knew what was actually happening. But the Pharisees are seeing these as two totally separate things. I'm either this or I'm that. John is saying, well, if you were truly a disciple of Moses, you would recognize that Jesus is the very word.
I see. Yep. Yes, we saw a conclusion like that, I think, in the last reading we did too.
Yeah.
That if you had ever understood what the Torah was doing,
you would recognize.
You would see that this is Torah.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I take us home?
Yes.
Okay. So picking up then in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Okay. It seems to me like, I really appreciate that you have pointed out along the way how this man has been sort of talking about his understanding of Jesus or his relationship to Jesus differently. It's been evolving each time he tells the story, because it makes this last part seem less abrupt. When I read it on my own, I was like, whoa,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa, he's worshiping him. He's worshiping him. That's like a big jump from saying I don't know if he's a sinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you I mean, does worship him mean we haven't seen that before, have we? That someone has worshiped him, or have we? That seems like a big statement to me.
Yeah, so there's a couple things there. One is that the Greek could mean worship. It could also mean bow down or kneel down or show homage. So the translation worship implies a certain sort of religious commitment that the Greek verb maybe doesn't. And so thinking about, well, what's he actually doing? Is he worshiping, or is he, bowing down to someone he regards as his superior?
Yeah.
Not entirely clear.
Yeah.
If in fact it's about worship, then yes, this is the first time we've seen any mention of worshiping Jesus.
It and that's an interesting, resonates also with this. There's, in my translation, 36, he calls Jesus Sir. Mm-hmm. And then in 38, he calls Jesus Lord.
Yeah.
But I think those are the same Greek word. So there's ambiguity here about what exactly the man thinks. Clearly, he thinks Jesus is someone deserving of honor, but it's a little unclear some of what's beyond that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is the word in both verses is kurie, which is the word that you use for someone who is your superior, sort of like in medieval usage of lords and ladies.
Yeah.
And it is also the word that gets used of God in the Hebrew scriptures, where in the place of the tetragrammaton. And so it can have like this whole range of meanings, as can the word to worship here, bow down. And so I think there's some ambiguity about what John is actually saying.
Yeah. That's so interesting because my initial question reading it from the English and not from the Greek was what has changed from just a few minutes ago to now that suddenly he is willing to make these big statements about Jesus and refer to Jesus as Lord in the God kind of Lord or worship. But now I'm wondering, is he even doing that?
Well, I think he has clearly made some sort of a step. And I think the question is how big a step is it?
Yeah.
Right. And Jesus has said, look, I'm the Son of Man. And he seems to acknowledge that, which is kind of a big deal. Like it is a step short of saying that he is the Son of God or God incarnate or something. There's a lot of debate about Son of Man. I myself read Son of Man in light of Daniel chapter 7, where you get this sort of divine figure who is given authority over the world. And I read Son of Man that way. It can also be a reference to like a mortal, like a human being, which is very confusing. Like it either means like
really
a divine
different.
figure. Like,
it is really different.
Which is kind of interesting in John in particular, because like Jesus is both of those things. And so that one phrase, Son of Man, captures both his divine origin and also his humanity.
Yeah.
But that's a big step, I think, for this guy to say, like, okay, I now believe that. And so whatever I'm doing, bowing down to you, worshiping you, it is with the new understanding that you are indeed the Son of Man, which is something very much beyond what he was able to say. And so your question of what has changed, I think, is a really good question. Even if he's not going all the way.
Even if he's not all the way, it's still a big, something has shifted.
Yeah. Do you have any sense, do you have an answer to the question, what has changed?
I mean, my answer to the question is very like earthly and maybe somewhat mundane, but like he has now been driven out of the community he was a part of.
Yeah.
So if he was already sort of on the edge of the community because he was blind, now he sees, but he's been driven completely out.
Yeah.
And that is, that is when a door closes, sometimes you see other things.
I love that, Amy. I mean, it's troubling, and but it's, I think that's a really nice reading of the text that, when the man is kicked out, that's when Jesus comes and finds him. And that's when the man is able to believe it in a different way. And so there is something here about Jesus looking out for those who have been removed from their communities who have not been able to understand them or what they're about or what their beliefs are. And Jesus, I was lost, but now I'm found, right? I was blind, but now I see.
Yeah.
Here comes Jesus to say, you're still part of my community. And now maybe you're open to a different kind of understanding. So I think that's exactly right. In the fracture of community, there is new possibility.
Right.
Even though the fracture of community is really painful.
It's really painful, but you are no longer beholden to a certain set of communal norms or, and so it does, you lose things and you gain things, I guess.
This makes me go back and think about Nicodemus in chapter 3 and this idea of being born again from above. Mm-hmm. And so we talked in that discussion about, being born is a painful process and it connects you to a different family than you were originally connected to, and it breaks your natural ties. And here I think is a version of that sort of playing out as he's been born now into Jesus's family, but it's been a pretty painful disruption of what has come before.
Can you talk to me about Jesus's statement in 39, and the metaphor sort of carries us through to the end, or maybe not metaphor, I don't know, about blindness and seeing? I mean, so what he says is, I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Mm-hmm. And it made me think of that quote. I don't even know where it's from, but you've probably heard it too, that art or journalism, or I've seen various things stuck in here, is there to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Yeah. But that seems different than to make those who see blind. Why would you want to do that?
And then, in the last verse, if you were blind, you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. So if you think you see, then you are actually blind, and that is sin. Mm-hmm. It's a very complicated thing Jesus has done. And, one thing we should probably say is Jesus' miracles tend to work in the Gospel of John in this progression of there's a sign, there's a dialogue about the sign, and then there's a discourse that Jesus gives. At this moment where the text is, we're ending the narrative lectionary, we've seen the sign and the dialogue, but not the discourse, which comes in chapter 10, which is actually the text for Good Friday, which we'll talk about in our special episode that's coming up. So Jesus is going to do some work to interpret what he's saying right here. And so,
I see.
So this need not be we don't need to solve it all right now. But I do think there's something going on here about, we've talked about how John uses the term sin in the singular quite often, the sin of the world. And we talked early on about how John is not thinking of sins like the individual things that we do that might violate some kind of moral code or violate the Torah or whatever, but some sort of larger phenomenon of the relationship to God or not. And I think one of the things that's happening here is those of us who think we see because we fit into the world are at risk of actually being blinded from the true reality, which is the godly reality that lies behind the world that we see. And so when we're too comfortable in the world as we encounter it, we miss what's really going on. And when Jesus comes into the world, he puts that choice, like now you can see what it looks like to follow the Torah. And if you realize that, now you see what's truly, truly real, which is the godly world that lies behind the reality that we experience. If you reject that and think you see the world the way you've always seen it, you are blinded to the true reality. It's a very complicated idea that gets caught up in these last couple of verses.
Yeah, I mean, that it makes sense though. Like I think in images, and I have all these sort of like almost hologrammy images of like, what you think you see.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is there and actually more real in the way that different things sort of pull our attention, the shiny things in our societies or whatnot. Okay. So I think this whole line of thinking, at least for me, is very much just leads me right into concluding thoughts that we might bring forward from this text. So I will ask you the weekly question, Bobby. Yeah. What is rising to the top for you?
Yeah, I've been struggling to stay in the ancient text this whole time. You can sort of several times I've been sort of pushing toward what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And so I think that this text to me is really resonant in all kinds of ways with contemporary life. The one that I'm really drawn to, and I've been kind of gesturing toward it along the way, is what I was just talking about, which is this idea that there is a reality behind the reality that we experience. And according to the Gospel of John, that reality, which is the kingdom of heaven, which is the community that God envisions from the Torah all the way through the gospel, that is the real reality that we are meant to inhabit. It's not some kind of distant place where you go when you die, although maybe it also is that, but it's also a way that you inhabit the world here and now. And this text, I think, is putting that front and center. There is a world that we are meant to inhabit. There is a world that we currently inhabit, and they are not the same. And for the Gospel of John, the decision point is Jesus. When you encounter Jesus and you see the love that Jesus has, and when you recognize that God desires the reconciliation of the whole world, and that there is plenty that Jesus can offer, that God can offer, that we saw in the feeding of the 5,000, when you recognize that, it ought to change the way that you live. And the resistance comes from those of us who think we know how we ought to live, because the world has given us a way to live, and we have been pretty successful in it, right? Like, in some ways, this gospel is saying the hardest time is for those who are successful in the world as it exists. And so this guy who is blind, physically blind at the beginning of the story, is the one who has the most spiritual insight. He's the one who is most open to being transformed. And he gives his testimony, and people like me who think we've got it all figured out don't listen to him. So I think there's something really rich in this text about those of us who think we see the way the world works, like we understand how we're supposed to be. We're the ones that are at risk of sort of alienating ourselves from God, and that if we truly encounter Jesus, then it would make us pay attention to people who give testimony about how their lives have been transformed, who don't have all this sort of background that prevents them from understanding what's really going on in the world. I read this text as a really clear call to pay more attention.
Yes.
That Jesus is diagnosing the sin of the world, and we need to pay attention lest we continue to participate in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, I love so much about what you said. And one thing that really jumped out to me is the power for me of the metaphor of sight.
Yeah.
For the problem and also the solution, but that the sense of sight in particular, at least in, a lot of modern Western culture, the world I live in, we rely so much on sight, and it lets us go fast. Like we fill in a lot of information because we can just quickly scan a room and, feel like we know what's going on and miss so much. And it has me thinking back to the beginning of this reading today, where it said sort of, God's going to work something out in this person who is blind. And we said, do you mean heal them? And like, maybe, but maybe also there's something easier to access when you don't have the distractions of metaphorical sight, at least.
Yeah.
This is maybe kind of a silly thing, but I'll tell you anyway. So I wake up before anyone else in my family, and we have, kids and dogs. And so I'm trying not to wake other people up. And so it has been my practice for many years not to turn on any lights. And so, I know how many stairs there are going down. So I count the stairs, and I always spend a moment thinking, before I went to bed, did I notice there was furniture that had been moved so I don't trip on something in the house? And I can tell by smelling the room, did the coffee go on? Did the puppy make a mess?
Yeah.
Did what are the things I need to be attuned to in this room? And to be honest, I probably don't really need to do it anymore. I couldn't wake my teenagers with a fire alarm at this point.
Yeah.
But I've come to really like that slow discovery of what's happening in the house when your sight is cut off. And I feel like it gives me a much, appreciation for a lot more of the things that are going on. And I think that metaphor in this section of text and in the wider world is really a good one, really a powerful one.
I love that, Amy, and that, the thing that you said that really is sticking with me is sight lets us go quickly. And I think that's also true of the sort of metaphorical sight, like what we think we know enables us to move quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it makes us overlook things that are outside of what we think we know. And so to slow down and really pay attention in different ways can make a world of difference.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I think is leaving me with a lot to sift through over the course of the next week.
Yeah, me too. The good news is our special episode that will come out shortly is on the very next verse, John 10, 1-18, which is, as I was mentioning earlier, the discourse where Jesus explains what he's been trying to say this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to linger with these kind of ideas
Mm-hmm.
in a little bit of a different set of images next week.
Yeah, and we can see, I kind of appreciate that this week we got to say, like, what do we think about this?
Yeah.
Or at least what do I think about this? Because you already probably know what Jesus is going to say about it. And then we'll see next week how it aligns or grows or changes with Jesus's reflection on it.
Yeah, so we'll encourage all our listeners to listen to our Ash Wednesday special episode. And that's where we'll be talking about the Good Shepherd.
I'll see you there.
All right, see you then. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced by Bobby Williamson and edited by Joel and Laura Becker. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby. We're grateful to our many supporters for helping us keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois, and to our newest sponsors, Carlene Young, Cindy McDonald, Jean Paul Donaldson, and Michael Poulos.
Join us again next time for a special Ash Wednesday study of John chapter 10, verses 1-18, the story of the Good Shepherd. Until then, keep on digging.